What I'm taking away from this is developers need to get really good at using these AI tools like Copilot or risk getting replaced by them, because Copilot is going to completely change how we work. Alright folks, I'm Parth, I'm a software engineer, and in this video, I'm going to try to build a simple Reddit browser using GitHub Copilot. So if you're a developer or generally curious about AI tools, this will be a fun one. Now, Copilot is just one out of a long list of developer tools that includes Cursor, Replit, Windsurf, to name a few. You've probably heard of Cursor AI, and that is maybe a little bit different because it's built from the ground up and centered around using AI for development. Whereas Copilot, I feel, is built more as layers on top of the traditional development workflow. But at the end of the day, I think they're all trying to achieve the same thing, which is make writing code easier for developers and make them more productive. So before we get into it, let's see how Copilot actually helps you. There's Copilot Chat, which basically works like any other chatbot like ChatGPT or Gemini, except that you can use extensions to give Copilot more context and therefore help it give you more relevant answers. Copilot can give you suggestions and next step recommendations. You can also invoke Copilot Chat in line and ask it for suggestions on a specific method or line of code. And then there's Copilot Edits, which I think is the coolest feature. You give Copilot a set of files that you want to work with, ask it whatever you'd like to build or update, and then Copilot gives you the changes, which you can then choose to accept or reject. But let's get coding and see these features in action. So for this exercise, we will build a simple Reddit browser to show some trending posts and maybe filter for posts from specific subreddits. And let's see how Copilot handles that. So to get started with Copilot, you should have a GitHub account. Then if you're using VS Code, just go ahead and install this GitHub Copilot and Copilot Chat extension, which I already have in my workspace. And once you sign in with your GitHub account, you should have these chat options in your toolbar. So I want to build this project out using Angular, but you know what? I've never actually used Angular before. I've only used React for front-end web development. I already set up the boilerplate project using the ng-new command, but let's ask Copilot if there's any key concepts I need to know for getting started with Angular development. So I'll just say this is my first time working with Angular. Now I know I made some typos there, but I think it should be fine. It should still be able to give me a good answer. Okay, so let's see, it says here are some key concepts, key differences between React and Angular, which is helpful to know. Important Angular concepts, components and decorators. Okay, makes sense. Okay, great, it shared some documentation so I can open up the docs in another window, RxJS, and then some tips as well. Okay, great, pretty good answer. Now, a simple question like this is not where the value in Copilot is. So I could very easily just go to another chatbot and ask this same question. So let's go to Gemini and paste in this question, maybe fix some typos, and let's see what Gemini says. So welcome to the world of Angular. Okay. So key concepts React developers should know when they're moving to Angular. Data binding, directives. Okay, that out. Well, I think they redesigned their website. That's pretty cool. But anyway. Oh, and it gave me a comparison table between React and Angular, which is pretty nice. And tips for getting started as well. So as expected, going to any other chatbot like Gemini or ChatGPT will give you a good answer for a simple question like that. So for Copilot, the real value comes from the context it has within VS Code. So let's go to Copilot Edits. I'm going to add a bunch of these files from my project to the working set. So all the files that I have open in my editor at the moment. And let's ask it to remove all the unnecessary boilerplate code that I have in my project right now. Okay, so let's see what Copilot says here. I'll help you clean up the boilerplate code. Here's the step-by-step to remove some of the default template content. And it made some changes in app component HTML, app component CSS, app component TS, and then config. and it shows you the diff. So I can go to this file, scroll down, and I'll see that it's made it. So whatever's in red, it is asking to remove all of these lines. And then whatever's in green, it's asking to add that. I'm going to accept that change. Oh, and that takes me to the next file. Whatever, let's accept the change. So it's just cycling me through all of the changes that I made. Okay, so we've cleaned up a lot of our files. Now let's ask it to help us run the code. Okay, so install dependencies. So let's do an npm install. That's done. Start the development server, and that should take me to localhost. And yeah, there's nothing here because we removed a lot of the boilerplate that Angular adds by default, but we have the server run. So before we move forward, let's talk about chat versus edits for a minute. So if you're using chat, you can add context to it using extensions like the workspace extension, which gives it the context of your current workspace. Or if you're working with, let's say, Azure in your app, you can install the Azure Copilot extension from the extensions marketplace, this one, and then you can just type in at Azure and then use that extension. Or you could also choose to work with a specific file by using the hash key and then referring to your entire code base or choosing a specific file like app component CSS. But within edits, it already has the context of the workspace, if I understand this correctly. And you can still choose to add specific files to your working set that you want to make changes across. Then there's also an agent mode that launched recently that's still in preview, which just means it's a super early beta. And that goes one step further, and it can make changes for you autonomously without you having to accept or reject those changes. And then it also reviews those changes to check if there's any issues that might arise from adding those changes and proactively fixes them. So basically it's Copilot edits on steroids. But getting back to our app, now that we've cleaned up our files, let's start adding some UI changes and features that we want. Okay, so first things first, let's ask it to build a simple homepage for the Reddit browser. I told Copilot I want to build a simple Reddit browser, and let's start by adding calls to the Reddit API and display trending posts. And then it has suggested, it's created a bunch of new files and then suggested some changes across other files. So let me just review some of these changes and I will accept them. So it looks like we are running into some errors while starting the server. Okay, so let's tell Copilot edit. I had to jump in there for a few minutes and it took some back and forth with Copilot to get this working. But we have this server set up where we're pulling the popular post. And if I go to my browser, as you can see, we have this just simple title, Reddit browser, and then we have some posts that we can scroll through. And it's showing you the likes, or I guess the upvotes and comments on that post. But now let's get back to our Copilot edits and ask it to make some additional changes. And by the way, you can choose the model you want to use in this dropdown. So you have options like Claude 3.5 Sonnet, ChatGPT 4.0, O3 Mini as well, I think, and Gemini 2.0. I prefer Claude 3.5 Sonnet because it's been the most accurate in my experience, at least for Python code, which is what I mostly work with. But let me know in the comments if there's a specific model you prefer. I've been curious to try out O3 Mini. I've heard it performs really well in a lot of different scenarios. But anyway, let's ask Copilot to add a toggle to switch between light and dark mode. It's probably going to have to work with some CSS files. Let's see if it can pick that up by itself. Now it's throwing an error. Okay, so again, it took a couple prompts, but I was running into some errors, and then I just asked Copilot to fix them, and it did. So now I have this button in the top right corner, which if I click it, we go into dark mode. But I asked for a toggle. So let's ask Copilot to make this a sliding toggle instead of a button. And then let's also ask Copilot to fix the color of this title. I'm hoping it gets this on the first try because I think this is a relatively simple change, but let's see. I've accepted all the changes Copilot asked me to make and saved them, And now if we go to the browser, okay, so we have a toggle here. So that is fixed. The title though still stays black. So let's tell Copilot that. Okay, so it added a class to the title, and then it's probably going to apply the styles to this class. Okay, perfect. So when we switch to dark mode, the color of the Reddit browser title changes as well. I'm happy with that. So while you're coding, you can also go to a specific file in your workspace, select a block of code, hit Command I, and then ask Copilot to explain that block of code. Okay, so it says the toggle theme function in theme service TS is responsible for toggling the theme of the application between light and dark mode. Okay, so it provides a pretty good description of what it thinks the function is doing. Makes sense. I think that's neat. That's pretty helpful, right? And then I can also ask it to document this. There we go. Let's accept the changes that Copilot made, and we have a bunch of comments, pretty good documentation for it. It did mess up in terms of the formatting. So if it does that correctly, I think that's pretty helpful. Now you can also ask Copilot to generate unit tests for a specific block of code. So if we go to our app component file, let's select this load trending post method. And then I think if we do /test, yep, that will generate unit tests for selected code. But we're not going to do that because real engineers test in production, right? I'm kidding. So let's see what Copilot comes up with. So it generated a test file, which is not named properly, but yeah, it's doing some setup. So before each test, it's going to use the Jasmine package to run these tests, and then it has a few different test cases. We're not going to run tests right now because we don't need to, but Copilot does have the feature to generate unit tests, which I think can be pretty helpful. Now I do want to test one more feature in our Reddit browser, which is adding a drop-down to filter the posts we're pulling by subreddit. It's adding the drop-down here in the HTML, makes sense, and then updating some CSS. So let's go ahead and save all of these changes. I'm not expecting this to work on the first try, but let's see. Okay, so as has been the theme with this exercise, I had to jump in and then do some debugging myself, but finally we have our drop-down. It doesn't look so great, but that's okay. But we have our drop-down where we can choose the subreddit that we want to pull the post from. So by default, it's set to popular, but I can choose science, and that updates all the posts that we have in our list that we're displaying. Then I can switch between light and dark mode. So it works, right? Okay, I think we've tested a bunch of Copilot's capabilities, and I think we can agree. Sometimes it can be awesome and it does a great job. Other times, not so much. It can really struggle to fix even simple bugs. So it's definitely not perfect, and it will miss a few things every now and then, especially as your code base gets bigger. I think now more than ever, the bar to start writing code and build cool software and apps is much lower because of these AI dev tools like GitHub Copilot. I mean, anyone can open up Cursor AI or GitHub Copilot and just start building and learning. So what does this mean for software developers? That's the big question, eh? Is AI going to replace software engineers? I don't think so. Well, one day, who knows, maybe. If the Mavs can trade Luka Doncic, anything is possible. But still not for a few years. What it can do is take over the more monotonous and repetitive parts of the job and make us more productive. If you go to a large company and start working with a code base that is, let's say 10 years old, with contributions from hundreds of devs over the years, Copilot can make it so much easier to document the code, understand the context and reasoning behind every method and each line of code. So my 2 cents, I think that developers still need to have very strong fundamentals and be skilled at their jobs. But I think if we use tools like Copilot to write better code and better understand the code that we are working with, it can truly supercharge developers. I'd love to hear from you if you've tried any of these AI dev tools and what your experience was like. So Let me know in the comments. But that's been it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.